All right, ladies and gentlemen, most of you guys, I'm assuming, know what you're in for. This is going to be an average case of what if Deku was a villain. Just to give you guys a bit of a heads up, this is going to be more of a narrative-focused story, so I'm not exactly going to be sitting here making Deku the most busted character in the world. It's all going to be about how that story goes, and the finale, I'm positive it's going to have mixed feelings. I personally love what I did, but hey, to each its own. But to get there, you're going to have to watch the whole video. So if you somehow managed to make it halfway or through the full video, then it would mean the absolute world to me if you guys could leave a like on this one. That said, let's begin the story. So this entire thing is going to be starting off after the events of the sludge villain incident, because a lot of things are going to be changing in this timeline, with one of them being how All Might chooses to handle Deku lunging in to try to save Bakugo. Unlike in the original, All Might, seeing that this kid lunged headfirst into danger, doesn't see somebody with a heroic heart. He sees a fool, a kid who's gonna get himself killed trying to achieve an unachievable dream. Yes, he was quirkless and managed to become the symbol of peace, but that was only because he was given a quirk. It's not because he was some heroic person who ended up making it as a hero without a quirk. All Might knows the realities of this world, and the reality is that Deku's gonna die, or maybe get injured, or even worse than that, be the cause of multiple people's deaths due to him being there and sticking his leg where he doesn't need to be at. By the way, I just did my first cut of the video, and I'm just gonna quickly say, I am entirely not gonna edit this video. I want this whole thing to be free flowing, so if there is some mistakes on my part, or maybe there's some background noise, I'm really sorry about that, but I just want this to be one of the rawest videos that I've done for a while. Anyways, that being the case, as Deku would have lunged in the way of the sludge villain saying, "I couldn't just let you die, Kachan," you would suddenly see All Might appearing out of nowhere saying, "What do you think you're doing, kid?" As he would throw a Texas smash at the villain, and suddenly the entire area's weather would change. All Might, standing there seeing all the press begin to run up on him, would simply look down at the young man, telling him, or technically asking him, what exactly he had planned to do if he didn't show up. Die? Izuku, hearing the reality of the situation, would kind of just look down at the gaze of his number one hero, as it'd be in this moment that he would just not be able to look up. Then he would get chewed out by the villains, and as All Might would look at the kid, the last thing that Izuku would see was a disapproving head nod from All Might. As Izuku would walk home, he would be greeted once again to the scream. Sorry, I burped there, so I kind of lied. I did edit that out. Anyways, to the scream of Bakugo saying, "Hey, you damn nerd, you didn't help me at all, just so you know." So he would walk off angrily, and as Izuku walked off in sadness and straight up just rage and depression at realizing how unfair the world truly was, Katsuki Bakugo had his entire life change. All Might, seeing the fact that the young man was able to withstand that villain attack and already seemed to have the qualities of a hero, at least the strength, would actually go up to the young Bakugo and ask him to be his successor. Remember, in the original timeline, Bakugo would always question, why not me? I had the strength to become the symbol, and all he had was the heart. So in this timeline, All Might ends up choosing the successor with the strength, and I know some of you guys might be thinking, alright, I'm gonna click off the video now. Like, trust, this is all gonna make sense later. But anyways, with that being said, Deku, realizing that he had literally just stuck his leg in the way and knowing that everything was just kind of his fault, and that this world just kind of sucked for him, he would try for the next couple of weeks to act as though nothing had happened. The bullying at school from Bakugo would stop, but for some reason, he couldn't help but feel as though Bakugo was just trying to tell him something with his gaze every time he looked at him. No more was the bullying there, but it was almost just a look of pity. No more rage, but just straight up pity. As Izuku would sit there, he would contemplate the events of his life and wonder what exactly he's going to go on to do. He would think, well, All Might did say I could join the police force. Maybe I could help there. And after thinking about it a bit and looking up the results for quirkless people actually in the police force, Izuku would realize that that is not even in the cards either, with him realizing that the police force don't even let quirkless people go into that workforce. So after Izuku goes on to realize that, he kind of just falls down into this depression spiral of his hero literally telling him he can't be a hero, and starting to realize that his quirklessness is starting to affect him in different avenues of life altogether. Deku would start to get more and more pissed, and as time would go on, his hope and his drive to continue would just disappear. Eventually, Deku one night would end up writing a letter to his mother, leaving it on the table and disappearing. Deku would grab a bus ticket, making his way towards a different city, and once Deku would end up arriving there, he would make his way towards the top of a rooftop and just kind of look down, wondering if he's really gonna do this. And, well, he does. Simultaneously, however, while Izuku would be contemplating this decision, a man with a mask would actually be walking by. And as Overhaul would look up, he would see the eyes of a teary-eyed boy who looks scared, who looks like he just regretted everything he just did, falling down to his death. And as the blood would splatter, Overhaul would get pissed. But seeing this, he would simply use his Overhaul ability to restore Deku back to normal, as Deku, realizing that he had gotten a second chance, would look up to stare at Overhaul. Deku at this point would look at him, asking him how he did that and why, and as Overhaul would look at him, telling him not to do something stupid like that again, would begin to walk off. However, before he could, Deku would stop him, saying, "Wait." Overhaul would be about to actually overhaul Deku, just getting rid of him because he was annoying. Deku would then look at him with these eyes of just like hatred and rage, and as Overhaul would stare at the eyes of Deku, he would see conviction in them. Deku would go on to tell him that he just threw away his life and he saved it. There has to be something he can do for him. He saved a quirkless nobody, somebody who just a few short moments ago was ready to just let everything go, but now that he has a second chance, he wants to know if there's anything that he can do for Overhaul. Overhaul, looking at him, would tell him that a weakless person couldn't help him at all. And as he would be about to walk off, Deku would just mutter under his breath, "Typical. I wish everybody else knew what it was like to feel weak, to be quirkless." With Overhaul hearing that, he would actually look back at Deku. As interested in his previous statement, he would ask more, and it'd be at this moment that Izuku would go on to explain that all his life he's been quirkless. That's why he did what he did. He was tired of living in an unfair society that treated him worse just because he was quirkless. And Overhaul, upon hearing that from Izuku, would say, "What would you think about a society that returned back to before people had quirks?" Izuku, hearing that, would think that it'd be incredible. That way there'd no longer be prejudice. I could live a normal life. I could have so many more opportunities. Sure, Hero Society would be gone, but the playing deck would even out for me. Overhaul, hearing this, would look at Izuku, asking him if he truly is interested in helping. Maybe he could have some use as a shield. So he would say, "Come on, kid. Follow me. Your old life's gone. Now, you're a Yakuza." Deku, looking at the back of Overhaul, seeing the man responsible for giving him a second chance at life, would follow behind him, vowing that he was going to be doing something to repay him for the debt that he owed him. And as Deku walked behind this man, it was almost as if he felt a shadow overcoming him, like he was stepping into a world that he wasn't prepared for. But he would still do it, because at the end of the day, the life that he's living, it was a gift, and it was one that Deku was not prepared to just give up. After this would happen, Deku would arrive at the Yakuza household, with Overhaul holding a meeting with some of the leading members of the actual family. He would go on to explain that this here is Izuku Midoriya, saying that he's going to be a brand new member of the crew, as he would go on to pretty much tell them that he's going to be serving as one of his shields. And so, Izuku would end up undergoing an explanation of what that actually means. Pretty much, that if Overhaul ever finds himself under any danger, Izuku has to jump in, sacrificing his own life for Overhaul's sake. He would also tell him that he's pretty much just going to be undergoing normal tasks and doing normal gang activities. Deku, hearing that and realizing the new life that he actually just signed up for, would kind of look down in sadness, knowing that he officially just gave up on being a hero. Following after this man and not just thanking him and walking off may just turn out to be the greatest decision or the worst in his life. So, after Deku hearing everything that he is now going to have to undergo, he would remain working under Overhaul for the next 10 months. Instead of having the training arc alongside All Might, he would actually be greeted to a different one. because in this timeline, as Deku would spend his time there, he would go on to gain the trust of different members and allies, and as Izuku would grow in ranks due to his intellect, his ideas, and his strategies, Overhaul would actually start to consider Izuku a very valuable member of the team, going on to actually introduce Izuku to Eri, which would be a massive turning point in the story considering everything that's about to take place. This would actually end up causing massive shifts in the story and a paradigm between Izuku's motives and what he thinks he should do now. I mean, Izuku's a villain, sure, but he's not a monster, and knowing that he's going to be serving under a man who just a few rooms away is going to be having a little girl undergoing torture and having her body experimented on isn't something that would allow Deku to sleep well at night, not at all. The first day that Deku would be there present with Overhaul, his new muscular type build body would be staring at Overhaul as he would tell him that he understands how it looks. Looking at Izuku attentively, his gaze would not waver for a second, as Izuku looking at Overhaul, not knowing how to feel worried, scared, or fear, would simply stare at Overhaul nodding, knowing that regardless of even if he wanted to save the girl, he couldn't. He would then bow down as he would go on to be informed by Overhaul what exactly protecting Eri involves. And interestingly enough for Izuku, he would actually kind of enjoy the job. At the end of the day, he gets to, well, make sure that while she's not having all that horrible stuff happen to her, she at least gets to not feel horror for a moment, is the best way I could put it. Deku pretty much ends up deciding that, well, yes, he's now a villain. He's going to try to make the life that she does have at the moment as best as she could possibly have it. Because mind you, Deku feels for Eri. Regardless of all the new experiences that he's now had thanks to joining the Yakuza Overhaul family, Deku's still Deku. And now that I mention experiences, I think I should finally get into what Deku's time with the Yakuza family would have actually been like, which is actually going to be a bit interesting considering that what I see happening here is Deku first getting involved with this organization would lead him to probably being discriminated against, with people saying that a kid doesn't belong in the Yakuza family, and him kind of just turning into an errand boy that gets pushed and tossed around. I could see this ultimately leading to Deku finally meeting somebody like Kendo Rappa, who thinks with his fists, and pretty much ends up telling Izuku that if he wants to stop being looked down upon and called a weakling, well, to frankly stop being such a weakling, do something about it. This would actually lead a situation in which Kendo Rappa and Izuku actually end up becoming kind of close, in the sense that Kendo views him as like I don't know if you guys have ever planted a seed or something like that, and you're like watering it, making it grow every day. You kind of have this relationship of like seeing this thing grow up to become what it becomes. Kendo Rappa looks at Deku like that. Not like a little brother, but kind of like a pet project that he's working on. He would begin to train Izuku, not really having anything better to do, considering the fact that all he's there for is fights and to try to defeat Overhaul, who had previously defeated him 5 or 6 times, with each one resulting in his death. So, beginning to train Izuku, he would tell him to do push-ups, sit-ups, punches, boy would there be a lot of punches, and fighting training. Izuku would grow stronger day by day, and obviously would be bandaged up most of the time. His training would be incredibly intense, and due to the fact that he doesn't have school or anything else in the way, that's all that Deku would work on. Well, whenever he wasn't doing some random, dumb jobs for the Yakuza family. That said, as Izuku would be there about 6 months into it, Deku would start to cave out a new physique for himself, starting to look stronger, growing significantly in height, and developing a new killer instinct that Deku never thought he would have had. Obviously, being around so many villains would have drastically begun to change what Deku actually carried himself like, and this would ultimately probably lead Deku to having that whole Kendo Rappa aesthetic. Deku would be rocking like a big old white tank, not a tank, but like a white compression shirt with like these black boots and like these black cargo pants. He also has the really cool what's the mask that those people kept wearing? He has one of those, obviously, and he grew out his hair to start looking a little bit different. Also, Deku has like a couple tattoos on him now because he's part of the Yakuza family or whatever, that gang stuff. But yeah, regardless of this, Deku continues his training, and not only does he get stronger, but Deku learns how to take hits as well. Training under Kendo Rappa is not exactly pretty. Remember what happened to Kirishima? When he took a punch from Kendo Rappa, one. Remember, that was one. This dude's ultra, like super duper hardening quirk that had been amped up to a crazy degree had practically shattered upon one hit. So just imagine what would have happened to this quirkless Izuku. He definitely would have learned how to take a hit or two thanks to Kendo Rappa's pretty much aggressiveness and training style that he would end up putting Deku through. This would ultimately lead Deku to having to be in the graces of Overhaul multiple times, because pretty much Kendo Rappa would be like, "Boss, can you heal the kid? I think I went too far again." This would lead Izuku's durability to go through the roof, considering that eventually taking these hits and dodging these hits would become easy. Getting hit by the same attack over and over and over and over, your body eventually has to learn how to dodge it. Now, I'm not talking from personal experience because I ain't gonna lie, I have like some of the weirdest, weakest reaction time. At one point, a dude threw a ball at me and it was like coming at me so slow, and for some reason it hit me, and then I proceeded to be like, "Oh, let me dodge," which is a little embarrassing to admit, but it is what it is. Right? We all different, you know what I'm saying? Like, some people got bad reactions times, and I'm just one of them. But anyways, the point is, after all this time, Deku would definitely be a very skilled hand-to-hand combatant. Somebody that if you're just like a regular hero, you wouldn't want to go up against in close quarters combat. Not that it would really matter, because if Deku catches you on long range combat, well, safe to say he's gonna snipe you down with a pistol. That's the weapon of choice that Deku uses, alongside a knife if it ever comes down to it. But mostly, Deku likes to fight with gavel knuckles, a tool that Overhaul would have gave him that essentially work like brass knuckles, but they also have the added benefit of stunning the target and shocking them, which makes for some pretty interesting fighting scenarios. As Deku would get stronger and stronger, he would grow more in the ranks, eventually leading us to that 10-month time skip that I was telling you guys about, where Deku finally got into good graces with Overhaul, meaning that he ends up becoming the Caretaker. And this is where we can now finally delve into this interaction, as Izuku would stare at the young girl, seeing her on the operator table, seeing the bandages, the blood, and the needle that Overhaul was using to cut her open over and over and over again. Deku would show clear signs of just like, what is going on? Like, I don't want to be a part of this. But as Overhaul would stare at Deku, he would say, "Yeah, it looks bad, but at the end of the day, you have to understand, Izuku, this is necessary. She's the key to fixing this infected society of quirks. Once we're done developing this drug, nobody will be special anymore. We'll live in a world where the Yakuza can run free, where quirkless people won't be looked down upon, because instead of being out of ordinary, it'll finally be the ordinary." After lying to Izuku and telling him that the entire goal was to actually turn back the clock on society, Deku, looking at Eri, would feel bad, but the rage at the world, the way that this place had treated him, the rage at Bakugo, and even his favorite hero now, All Might, would actually lead Deku to pretty much just taking the pill. Izuku has to swallow it, because at the end of the day, this is the only path that Deku can see forward in order to pay this world back for the torture and horrible situations that it had put him under. So Deku would end up agreeing to this entire plan, even though he knows that it's horrible. He would continue to follow Overhaul, doing whatever he needs, like I said, becoming his caretaker, as this would lead to interesting conversations between himself and Eri. Because while yes, Deku has become hardened, that soft side of him, that side of him that cares about kids and sees somebody crying and can't help but try to be there for them, would hit. And this would lead Eri to actually becoming somewhat close to Izuku. Though she understands that Deku is part of the people who have her captive, she also understands that unlike them, he's not a monster. When he sees her crying, he genuinely would go up to her and like talk to her and tell her what hero society is like and all these crazy things. He would talk to her about the heroes and what it's like to actually live out there, and he would tell her about like playgrounds and stuff like that. Deku would actually bring her like cool toys and would spend time with Eri talking with her, which would be a good thing and a bad thing. Good because Eri now had a situation in where she didn't completely feel, well, hopeless and like life was completely horrible. At least there was a light at the end of the tunnel that she couldn't exactly see too well. But regardless of that, Deku would actually have this would be a bad thing. is what I'm trying to get to. Because even though, yes, Deku's making his life with her better, he's also getting closer with her. And that was Deku's worst mistake. Because eventually would come a day where as the both of them would be talking about things and Eri would be playing with the toy, looking up at Deku with those big beady eyes, she would ask, "Why am I here? Why don't I get to live a normal girl's life?" And Izuku, hearing that, would kind of have to look away, just like feeling anguish at the fact that he has to use her for his plan and Overhaul's dream to become a success. He would look away, beginning to pretty much spout on about a story. He would say, "You know, Eri, you were born gifted. That quirk of yours that Overhaul seems to call a curse is actually a gift. It's going to be leading society to a new route. A route where quirkless people won't be living in this horrific world where they're outcasts, they're treated like garbage, they're unwanted." Eri, hearing this, would wonder what exactly Deku was talking about. And that's exactly what he wanted. Unfortunately for Deku, in this moment, he would begin talking about what it was like to actually be quirkless, giving her a bit of a spiel into what his life was like, and beginning to explain to her that the reason that she's here is to reset the world, that her quirk is a gift, and it's the passageway to a brighter future. He would say this looking down as he would walk off, with the whole atmosphere having shifted. You know how like when things are clearly not okay between you and somebody else, the atmosphere just doesn't feel the same? That's what would happen in this moment. And as Izuku would begin walking away, he would start thinking about what he's doing. That at the end of the day, fixing society, quote unquote, or not, he's hurting somebody worse than what Bakugo would have ever done on him. And this would lead him to hate that. But one more thing would come to the forefront: the sports festival. After that event would have finally been over, Deku, having watched Bakugo's performance, would have kept tabs on what's going on with him, and definitely kept tabs on his mother. But the interesting thing that Deku would have noted was that Bakugo's different. He's gotten so much stronger, and so quickly too. It's so strange. It's almost as though his quirk had evolved, having new elements to it that had never been present before. His firepower had exponentially increased thanks to One For All's quirk amplification. And also, it's almost as though Bakugo's normal movements had become increased. That's not how quirks worked. Bakugo's linear progression is not what it should be, and this would lead a bunch of question marks to begin appearing in Deku's mind. He would wonder what exactly was going on, and after looking into Bakugo and doing a bit more research, he would start to connect the dots, realizing that he and All Might have been getting real close ever since the sludge villain incident. Deku, beginning to connect the dots together, would slam his hand on his desk, going, "Damn it!" As he would pretty much slam his hands. I just tried doing it myself, but it stopped the recording for some reason. I'm not really sure why. Maybe the audio spiked because I hit it really hard, but regardless, point stands. Once Deku would realize that Bakugo and All Might have to be connected somehow, and it's either his training or something else out of the ordinary that has helped Bakugo grow this much more powerful, would lead Deku to have more fire put on his rage, and he would suspect Bakugo and All Might of something even greater than what he had been led to believe. That said, eventually as time would pass, Deku would finally have one off day where he would have decided to spend the entire time training with Rappa, meaning that somebody else was responsible for caretaking Eri. This would be the day that she would run away, with that member having been killed by Overhaul and the heroes finding out about Eri. As Bakugo this time and Mirio would have both been on hero patrol, thanks to, him taking Izuku's place with the Cernide agency, this would actually end up leading to a scene just like in the original, where Mirio and Bakugo end up letting Eri go. And if you believe that maybe Bakugo would step in the way, then I mean, full power to you, maybe he would save Eri in this moment. But for the story that I'm trying to plot out, these plot points gotta be addressed. They would let her go once more due to Mirio pretty much looking at Bakugo telling him don't do it. So Bakugo standing down would allow Eri to be taken away. This would eventually end up leading to the whole raid on the actual house itself, as this would be the point in the story where things would finally start to pick up. Everything would start to change, with the first change present being that Deku would actually be with Overhaul when he was actually attacked by Mirio. And I would say and Bakugo, but Bakugo probably wouldn't be there because he's not able to phase through walls much like Mirio can, but regardless, him being there and his presence being added to the story, Deku wouldn't be wearing the Overhaul outfit. He would be acting as though he was nothing more than a kidnapped person, as Izuku would try to play out the part, having tears running down his face, telling Mirio that he was kidnapped as well, asking if the heroes were finally here to save them. But Mirio, not having any listings on his report and also noticing the muscular structure of Deku, his size and the tattoo, would actually catch on to Izuku's ploy. So instead of taking interest in him or thinking, oh, I need to save him, he would instantly go to attack Deku, thinking attack now, think later. So landing a blow on Izuku, which normally should have left him unconscious for hours, thanks to Deku's training with Kendo Rappa, he would be able to tank the attack, faking being knocked out. While this would be happening and Izuku would be laying on the ground thinking of what he can do to assist Overhaul, this is when finally Overhaul would begin to express the truth of what he's gonna do with Eri, believing Deku to have been unconscious in this moment. And as Izuku would hear that Overhaul's true intentions was to simply monopolize her and use her ability to create quirk destroying bullets as well as quirk restoring ones and monopolizing them by giving the destruction to the villains and the cure to the heroes, Izuku would realize that his entire time that he'd been working for Overhaul was a joke. As Deku would get up, he would look at Overhaul going, "It's not true. It's not true, is it, Overhaul? There's no way that you lied to me this whole time." But Overhaul, looking at Izuku, would say, "Whatever. I don't care if you found out. You're expendable, don't you get it? You're trash that I picked up off the street. In fact, you're even worse than trash." Deku, hearing this, looking at the ground, would say, "You're right," as he would look down, beginning to put on an act. He would then aim his gun towards the direction of Mirio, telling Overhaul that regardless of whether he lied to him, he saved his life. So aiming his gun towards the direction of Mirio, he would ready himself to pull the trigger. But before that, Mirio would say, "What? You're still gonna be on his side even after he's betrayed you?" Deku would scream at Mirio, say, "Shut up! You wouldn't understand." Then aiming at Eri with a smile, knowing what the hero was gonna do. After all, it's what he would have done. So shooting the bullet to the direction of Eri, this would lead Mirio jumping in the way as his quirk would be erased. In this moment, Deku would break out into a cackle, still in character, as rage would be coming to the surface, and as he would get closer and closer to Overhaul, using the training, the tactics, and hiding his bloodlust, finally Izuku appearing next to Overhaul would catch him off guard, shooting his quirk destroying bullet straight at Shisaki, which would ultimately end up destroying Overhaul's ability, which, well, I just said the name, and would leave him completely vulnerable. As this would happen, a smile would appear on the face of Izuku as, turning to Eri, he would then apologize, saying he's sorry, as all too quickly the heroes would arrive, specifically Bakugo, who, catching a glimpse of Deku, would think, "Deku?" Seeing him, Deku would look towards the direction of Bakugo as his gaze would change from sorry and understanding and trying to let Eri know that he didn't mean anything. He would then change to rage, as Eri, seeing the expression on Deku's face, would begin to feel the same fear that she would fear towards Overhaul whenever he would stare at her. Bakugo, still being stunned, would say, "Deku, what are you doing here?" And as Deku would look at the direction of Bakugo, he would say, "Isn't it obvious? I'm a villain, Bakugo. After all, what did you expect? Somebody tossed aside by society, told to be worthless? All the while All Might chose you, a pretentious wannabe hero with an incredible quirk and anger issues." I can't believe that that's what All Might was looking for. The hero I once had thought was amazing and great crumbled before my feet as he told me I couldn't be a hero. And you know, I knew that. But once I realized that I couldn't be a hero, Bakugo, it made things so much easier. If I can't be a hero, well, I'll just be. But as he would hear this, Bakugo would shoot off towards Deku's direction, trying to knock him out. But before that, Deku would dodge, shocking Bakugo at seeing Deku's speed, holding a button out in front of him as he would say, "Take one more step and I'll blow the entire place. Hundreds, no, maybe even thousands of people will die. Your men and mine. Your move, explosion boy." As Bakugo staring at the direction of Deku, knowing Deku not to be someone who would bluff about something like that, and seeing the look in his eye of just maniacal anger and rage, would just take a step back as he would tell Deku to get the hell out of here already. Deku in this moment would proceed to escape the entire area, as Aizawa and Nade would say, "Why aren't you stopping him?" To which Bakugo would say that he knows him, and if he knows him as well as he thinks he does, that he wasn't lying. So as Izuku would leave the place, hovering his finger around the button, telling them to think carefully about what they're doing. Because if Izuku even gets the faintest idea that they were gonna be trying to stop him, he was gonna blow this entire place to Kingdom Come. So, as Deku would grab the quirk destroying bullets, he would end up leaving the area, resolute on one goal: to eliminate every quirk on the planet. And after Izuku would end up leaving that entire situation with the heroes and the Overhaul, he would actually end up thinking to himself that now he doesn't have anything to do. His whole goals had been completely stunted by the fact that Overhaul was lying to him the whole time. And now that he doesn't have access to Eri and doesn't even believe that he has what it takes to actually use this bullets and do what he was planning to, he's not sure if he could even go through with the plan itself. But knowing that he couldn't simply be a one-man operation because he wasn't strong enough, would decide to align himself with another organization, the League of Villains. Knowing that they were working in tandem with the heroes to actually take down Overhaul's Shisaki gang, or what was it called, the Yakuza family, Deku would make his way there, knowing the last location where they had met. And arriving there, Izuku would be met with Shigaraki, as he would begin pleading to him to let him join his organization. But as Izuku would finish talking, Shigaraki would say, "You came all this way as a Yakuza family member, and you think that I'm not gonna kill you after what Overhaul did?" Deku, stopping him, would say, "I'm not here because I'm trying to backstab you, or try to get back at you for what you did. In fact, I thank those two members over there. Thanks to them and myself, Overhaul's been rendered quirkless. I turned back time on him. So we're pretty safe to say that I'm not going to be going back to the Yakuza family anytime soon." At this point, Toga would actually end up vouching for Deku, saying that it's true, that she actually was able to watch that actually happen. With Shigaraki hearing this, he would smile, thinking to himself that maybe they might just accept him, as Deku would smirk, saying that he's glad. Actually, let me reposition myself real quick, just because my back's starting to hurt a little bit. You guys wouldn't know it, but I need to turn out the AC. You guys wouldn't know it, but actually recording these videos sometimes be hurting my back hecka, just because of the fact that I be having to sit in a specific type of way where my back just be aching out of nowhere. You guys wouldn't even be able to understand, because the videos might be 40 minutes, but in total it might have taken me 2 hours to record 40 minutes. If the video's 2 hours, probably took me 5 or 4 hours to record that video, just because I have to cut out all the edits. Not this one. This one's probably only going to actually take me about an hour to make, but regardless. Anyways, with that said, Deku being there with Shigaraki would end up pretty much going on a tangent, as he would go on to explain, "Now that I'm here, I'd like to talk to the real boss." Because in this timeline, thanks to Bakugo never being kidnapped, because, he has one for all, we don't have the Kamino Ward situation, which impacts a lot of the story greatly, meaning that All for One would not actually be in prison custody. And Izuku, being aware of this, would think that it's probably in his best interest to talk to the real boss. But Shigaraki, hearing this, would get extremely pissed, as he would once again try to kill Deku. However, before his attack could land and fully place his fifth finger on him, All for One would speak, "Tomura, I'd like to speak to the boy myself, so if you wouldn't mind, spare the boy." Shigaraki, turning towards the TV set, would say, "But master, he came here blatantly trying to disrespect." But All for One would say, "Trust me, Shimura, we could use this boy." And as Izuku would hear that, a smile would appear on his face, as he would think, "Listen to the boss." Shigaraki would take his hands off of Izuku, as he would say, "You're lucky. If the master thinks that you have use, well then, I won't argue with him. But if you step out of line again, I promise I'll make sure that there's nothing left of you." So, Deku, hearing that, would suddenly be teleported in front of All For One, as we would get a bit of a monologue scene in which Deku would explain everything he knows in regards to Bakugo and All Might's connection, how Bakugo shouldn't be having those skills, knowing that All For One and All Might were somehow connected. He would go on to explain the plans of the Yakuza, using Eri to rewind people and destroy Quirk society. He would go on to explain that the reason he joined was because of this and that, and after All For One would end up hearing everything that Deku had told him, he would have a smile on his face, to which Deku would go on to explain that whether he decides to kill him or not, it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, Deku at this point was nothing but a reanimated, vengeful corpse that wouldn't rest until Bakugo and All Might crumble at his feet. All For One at this moment, looking at the gaze that Izuku had displayed, seeing more rage and hatred than even Shigaraki had in his very own eyes, would look at Izuku knowing that he should accept him. After all, he could be another important pawn. So, Izuku being accepted into the League of Villains would be asked a very important question: whether he would like to have the power to actually fight against these two. And Izuku, hearing this, would say, "What, you mean a quirk?" This would end up pretty much confirming the theory that Deku had had this whole time of the ability to potentially pass on abilities. Izuku would nod as All For One, walking towards Deku, placing his palm on his head, would proceed to give Deku a quirk. One, which I'm actually not going to be explaining what exactly it is just yet, because it's going to be coming into play during the end of the story. But after this would all happen, he would explain to All For One that Bakugo doesn't think like a normal person, and he's had more than enough time to think of a plan in order to kill that cocky bastard. He would go on to explain that there's multiple ways, but there's one that he has had a lot of time to think about. He would go on to explain to Overhaul that this plan would consist of a lot of explosives. He would go on to explain to him that by planting multiple different bombs in different areas, this would cause a multitude of heroes to have to go off in different directions, different sects of Japan, and this would give the heroes less firepower to face off against the villains. This would be perfect for one fell swoop to destroy hero society. This would leave All For One to question how exactly that would work, and after Izuku would go on to explain the thought process that he had of it, of giving the heroes clues and instructions to actually find them, and making them easily accessible to specific types of heroes, this would leave a smile to appear on All For One's face, as he would realize that this boy was practically a master strategist. So, once hearing that, Deku would go on to explain that using twice his abilities to create clones of other people, he could potentially create clones of the League as well as Deku, which would ultimately lure All Might and Bakugo to the scene where they're going to be having their deaths. Deku would go on to explain to All For One that All Might, being who he is, wasn't going to run from the challenge, nor was Bakugo. And with both of them being there, they're sure to actually call upon more heroes, trying to launch some sort of full-scale attack. But even if they wanted to, their forces wouldn't be fully comparable. So this would be the perfect opportunity to strike at All Might, and while he can kill him, Izuku can kill the other one. He would go on to explain that to do this, they're going to need multiple no moves in order to handle the rest of the heroes and keep them distracted, as Izuku would end up opening a small little container showing off quirk destroying bullets, giving one to All For One and Dr. Ujiko, as he would have a smile on his face knowing that with these, they're going to be able to mass produce that drug that's going to be able to destroy the quirks, and without any cure that All For Overhaul was trying to manufacture, it was going to be perfect. All Might completely powerless at his feet. That was a sight that he would pay everything for. So, once Izuku's plan would start to be laid down and it would make more and more sense, the plan would actually go full into effect, as we would end up getting a scene of All Might destroying into the area that they had pretty much ended up setting up as a trap, as multiple heroes outside would try to assist the heroes, but no moves from all separate directions would begin attacking at the direction of the heroes, completely thwarting their plans. Kurigiri's portal ability would be more than useful in the situation, and as the heroes would be distracted, Izuku in a sniper location would shoot a bullet at the direction of All Might, which hitting him instantly would render him completely powerless. All Might, going from his large muscular form, would shrink to a skeletal one. Now, he would stand there powerless with all of One For All's embers having been completely destroyed by the bullet, as Deku would then go on to shoot another one at Bakugo. But thanks to the fact that the second one was towards him, he would have more time to react, and so, using his abilities that he had learned thanks to All For One and his superior speed, would proceed to actually dodge the ability, and I know I said All For One, I meant One For All, he would actually be able to dodge, which suddenly, Deku then turning invisible, which is what Deku's quirk would be, he would try to appear next to Bakugo and shoot him with the quirk destroying bullet once more. But thanks to the fact that we've seen showings of Bakugo actually being able to fight and react to invisible people, mind you, that's even in season 1, he would last second barely be able to avoid it, as Bakugo, knowing that Deku was going to be a big point of contention, would throw a KO blow to the direction of Deku, knocking him out, breaking multiple ribs, and leaving him in a bloody state. As the fight would rage on and no moves in the war would completely go out of chaos, Deku, on the floor watching as the battle would take place, would end up sending a signal to the direction of somebody else who had taken part of a different sect of his plan, the kidnapping of Bakugo's parents and ultimate murder of them. After this would happen, Deku would stand up with his gun, as he would then proceed to shoot multiple rounds to the direction of the heroes, destroying multiple quirks, as Bakugo would come flying into the direction of Deku, coming face to face with him, as he would blast an explosion at him, Deku dodging before a blow would come rushing at him even faster than the last one, 20% One For All powered through Bakugo's hand, landing an attack on Deku. This would send him to the ground, as standing over him, Bakugo would say, "Why did you do this? Why would you become a villain, Deku?" But Deku was staring up at Bakugo with nothing but rage and hate in his eyes, would say, "I hate you. Oh, I hate you with all of my being." He would then click a button on his outfit, which would ultimately have an audio of his mother and father being slowly killed play. And Bakugo, hearing that, would take 2 steps back. No, you, damn it, Deku, you didn't. You made me up. But then the final cry of pain from Mitsuki would be released, and as she would say that, Deku would look at Bakugo saying, "If you want to see them again, why don't you take a swan dive off the roof?" As he would then be blasted by Bakugo, who nearly kills him with this, having felt so much rage in this moment, which ultimately leads to the screen fading to black, with Deku waking back up in Tartarus. As Deku would open his eyes, he would see a bunch of bright lights, and he would be held right next to, in the same prison, technically not right next to, but All For One, with Bakugo sitting in front of him with glass separating the both of them. Deku would be smiling at the direction of Bakugo the entire time, and as Bakugo would stare at the new Izuku that was now in front of him, the one who had changed so much, would end up asking him what happened, as Izuku would look to Bakugo, pretty much telling him that it's none of his business. Bakugo would scoff, going, "I figured as much. You know, I'm not here to bust your balls, Deku. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." But the second that Deku would hear an apology from the mouth of Bakugo, Deku would start shaking in the thing that was pretty much holding him there, as he would start to pretty much tell him that he doesn't get to apologize, not after everything he's put him through. He would go on to scream at Bakugo, saying that all those deaths were his fault, calling him a piece of filth. As he would go on to scream at him that he created a villain, he made him, all those years of bullying, all those years of torture, and all those deaths were his fault. As he would shake and start continuing to move, the systems of operation that were pretty much holding Deku would start telling him any more movement will result in immediate death. And as Izuku would continue shaking and looking at Bakugo, screeching with all of his being, telling him that he hates him, Bakugo would end up pretty much telling him that he's sorry once more, as Deku's final word would finally be let out, and those chilling, terrifying words would hit Bakugo in the core of his soul, as he would end up walking away, seeing Deku take a bullet to the dome, as all the repercussions of Deku's actions would end up going viral. Quirkless people all over the world would begin to stand up, and the repercussions to the villain equal would start to be felt throughout the entire world. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where What If Deku Joined Overhaul is going to be ending. Honestly, after having recorded, I have kind of mixed feelings about it. A part of me loved the story and the direction of it, but another part of me thought that the story could have also went in a different path. But hey, you get what you get and you don't throw a fit, I guess. Anyways though, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you guys went on to enjoy this video. Shout out to the person who commissioned this video and have a good day. Peace.